Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIke.com.
And it is Sunday, March 6th, 2016. How are you? Hope you're having a good weekend. Hope you're hale and hearty wherever you happen to be. This is Sunday View with myself, Richie Allen, brought to you in association with DavidIke.com/headlines. So as you're listening to this, as you're listening to it, and I hope you are listening to it, do check out DavidIke.com/headlines. Many of the things I talk about over the next 45 minutes or so, you will find analysed in great detail on David's website. Get on there. Get on there now. By the way, mention it quite a bit, but I'm going to keep doing that. Tickets to all of the scheduled worldwide Wake Up Tour events even. So all the ones that have been scheduled, tickets are now available at davidike.com. So get on to davidike.com, find out more about the tour. And if it's coming to a city near you, the chances are it will be. It's going to be all over the world. Also on davidike.com, links to The Phantom Self, David's new book, which has just been released. It's a fantastic read. I've read it a couple of times. And I must say, people who listen to this programme, whom have received their copy of Phantom Self and who have read it, universally saying they are absolutely delighted with it. They've been astounded by it. And waxing lyrical about the book. It really is terrific. So check out davidike.com. Huge supporter of the independent media, not just this particular programme. So good stuff. Loads to get into today. Sunday View, in case it's your first time, I look at the Sunday newspapers in Britain and reflect on one or two of the big stories over the last week. And I give you an independent media perspective on those stories. That's what it is. Well, that's what Sunday View is basically. As I'm talking to you today, it is in the morning. It's in the AM here in Manchester, the great city of Manchester. It's in the AM when I record this. It's begun to snow again. Ever so lightly. Not much, but just a little bit. I say that because, of course, we had a deluge of snow on Friday, which put paid to plans to record the last the last episode of Series 2 of our television show, which we will do now next Friday. But the snow was so heavy over a 12 to 14 hour period that it caused absolute chaos here in Manchester. It disappeared then on Saturday, but started to snow again. I like it. I like looking out at it. But I am mindful, and I don't preach. I think you know I don't preach. I never do. I certainly do not. I'm not in any way pious, but I do, and I am mindful. It's very cold right about now. You know, February, March, early to mid-March. These are difficult times for people who are sleeping rough and sleeping on the streets. And all I'm saying is, and I'm not preaching at all, if you pass a man or a woman and you think that they are sleeping rough or that they're having difficulties, buy them a cup of hot chocolate or a cup of coffee and a sandwich and ask them, are they all right? Just do that, eh? It isn't a lot to ask, really. And like I said, I don't want to come across as if I'm sounding preachy. I'm not. It's something that we do. It's not a lot. It's not the biggest deal in the world. But I think if we all did it, think of the difference it would make. Don't allow local authorities tell you that you can't look after your fellow man, your fellow woman. Don't do that. Don't listen to the lunatics. You know, forget these zoning laws. You can't swear in public. You can't feed the homeless. Mention all of this on Friday. Anyway, it's just a little thought this Sunday. It's Mother's Day. It's Mother's Day. Oh, God. Or Hallmark Day. A corporate holiday. Well, it's not even a holiday, is it? Of course it's not a holiday. It's a day dreamed up by a massive corporation to get you to part with money to prove that you love your mother. When if you have a good mother, you shouldn't need to be told on a day like today to honour her. If you have a good one, that is. You might not have. Right. So, a couple of things before I look at the Sunday papers which are worth mentioning. If you are a listener to the Richie Allen radio show, you will remember the week before last, wonderful Victoria Lilly, a Salford-based human rights activist whom comes on my programme from time to time. I met her last weekend in Manchester. Great lady. She was on the programme talking about Ben Devoy. Ben's a young man whom was sentenced to 16 weeks in prison under the Serious Crimes Act because he posted a rant on YouTube about a lenient sentence given to a convicted paedophile. This was horrendous, the idea he would be sentenced to prison. Anyway, an appeal was heard on Friday in Warrington. Now, he'd spent 5 weeks in jail. An appeal was heard. Risky, because if the appeal went against him, he might have been given longer. But he won the appeal, thanks be to Jesus. Thanks be to Christ. He won the appeal, and he was left out of prison just before lunchtime on Friday. Ben will be on the Richie Allen Show talking to me live tomorrow, Monday. Don't miss that. Ben Devoy. Ben, if you're listening to this, and you might well do, I'm delighted, mate. I really am. I'm so happy about it. I don't know you personally. I'm looking forward to chatting with you tomorrow. But what an injustice that was. So Ben Devoy joins me tomorrow. So shall we look at the Sunday papers, shall we? Let's have a look at the Sunday papers. Right. Sunday Telegraph, straight up, picture of Jerry Hall on the front page. Mother of fucking Jesus. Jerry Hall dressed in white, carrying that thing, that bunch of flowers that the bride chucks over her shoulder. She got married to Rupert Murdoch. Jerry, what first drew you to multi-billionaire 95-year-old Rupert Murdoch? Oh, it's easy. It's too easy to be nasty and horrible and disgusting. So I'm going to be. No, I'm not. Horrible, horrible, horrible people. Evil, sickening people. We know what Murdoch is. And Jerry Hall, well, leave that there. There's a big picture of her on the Sunday Telegraph. I'm sure there are pictures of the Murdoch nuptials or the Murdoch post-nuptial festivities adorning a lot of papers. He doesn't own the Telegraph, Murdoch. News Corp owns the Times, doesn't it? But anyway, that's on the front page. But also, what's also interesting on the front page of the Telegraph, Boris fury over EU bullying scandal. London Mayor says business leader suspended for supporting Brexit was crushed by the agents of fear. Do you know what that's about? It's about the leader of a guy called John Longworth, who leads the British Chambers of Commerce. He said that he backed Britain leaving the European Union. The day after, he was suspended by the Chambers of Commerce. The allegations are that the British government, David Cameron's allies in the British government, who want, of course, Britain to stay in the European Union, petitioned or lobbied the British Chambers of Commerce to suspend or to move against John Longworth. Johnson is saying it's disgraceful, it's the agents of Project Fear. I'm going to tell you more about that in a few minutes' time. It is, of course, disgraceful if it can be proved that agents of Project Fear, Project We Must Stay In, contacted the British Chambers of Commerce and said, you got to get rid of this guy because he's telling the truth, basically that we should leave and we'd be better off. If that is the truth, we'll get to the bottom of it. We think it is. The Sunday Times. EU fuels terror and fascism, warns Gove. Michael Gove. Oh, well, he's the Justice Secretary in Britain. He's been speaking to the Sunday Times and he says that the European Court of Justice has undermined UK intelligence agencies. He's one of the bevy of beauties, the Addams family, the Munsters, that they've rolled out to be on the Leave side, which we think is a great mindfuck operation, basically. You get all these people to say they want to leave, but make them the most heinous people in Britain. Ian Duncan Smith, Preeti Patel. I could go on all day. The Sunday Times also has a lovely picture of Rupert Murdoch and Jerry Hall. Oh, Jesus. There's also an interesting story about the BBC to charge for viewing on phones. This is going to be interesting. I mean, we'll cover this in depth in future Richie Allen radio shows. The television licensing fee, which a lot of people have been avoiding paying it because they've been using loopholes like, well, I don't watch live BBC. I get it on demand. I watch the BBC iPlayer on demand. Therefore, I'm exempt. They're going to roll out laws. Of course, they're laws. Very, very, very shortly in the very near future to make it difficult. Impossible to avoid paying the BBC licence fee. Sunday Times, right? More on the European Union shortly, so I won't stay with that. The Sunday Express tabloid newspaper says the European Union has drawn up plans to seize control of the British Coast Guard service. Now, they're onto something here. The paper says the European Union wants a pan-European border force and would take control of the UK's Coast Guard so it can police migration on the seas. Now, this is true. The Sunday Express often puts out a lot of sensationalist bollocks, basically. A lot of it to do with the weather, usually. But in this, they're right. Russia Today, late last year, as covered on this particular programme, ran a report suggesting the same, and it was backed up with documentation. They do want to place a pan-European border force at European Union countries' borders. A European Union police force, effectively. Oh, yeah. Again. And by the way, stop. There's one guy, and he's a coward. He's a vacuous coward. I keep getting these emails from one guy, and he keeps changing his email address, criticising me for mentioning David during some of these Sunday views. David Icke has been saying this forever in his books. I'll mention David Icke again a bit later on in this podcast. Absolute chapter and verse taken from predictions made by David Icke that this was coming. European Army, European Police Force. Anyway, it's in the Sunday Express. You can read the Sunday Express online. So get on to Sunday Express .co.uk. The Sunday Times, you still have to subscribe to that. Bastards. So I'm not subscribing to it anyway. Sunday Observer. Top headhunters admit UK bosses pay absurdly high. The pay for Britain's senior bosses is absurdly high, according to interviews with top headhunters reported in the Sunday Observer. A study by the London School of Economics, don't get me started on the London School of Economics and who they really are. The essence of Rothschild Zionism. But anyway, the LSE did a study saying that the average pay package for a chief executive is worth £4.6 million a year, while many of the companies that they oversee, staff are working on minimum wage or just above. Oh yeah, absolutely. Got into that a lot last week, talking about Sir Stuart Rose, the former head of Marks and Spencer's. That son of a bitch says that it's a bad thing if low income earners in the UK, if their wages come up because we leave the European Union. Because if we leave the European Union, cheap labour can't flood in. So British workers, British men and women who you're supposed to be looking after, they would do better. Sir Stuart Rose earned over £1.5 million a year working for Marks and Spencer's doing sod all probably. Didn't want to see that. It's not a good thing if people earn higher wages and do better. Anyway, that's in the Sunday Observer. There's also stories on the front page of the Sunday Observer, one of them being Labour voters urged to fight for the European Union because Jeremy Corbyn, God love him, well-meaning as he is, decent man as he probably is, hasn't a clue about the bigger picture. Doesn't know what's going on. Really doesn't. Totally uninformed. And anyway, not going to spend too much time denigrating Jeremy Corbyn. The Sunday People front page story about a young man, 17-year-old drama student, Christian, who intervened to save a woman who was stabbed in the stomach in a street or on a street in the West Midlands. Horrible story that the mainstream media, BBC, Sky and Channel 4, they're all over this story because they love this sort of thing. But it's a terrible, terrible story. A man stabbed a pregnant woman in the stomach. Thank God, if God exists, the baby is fine, but she's in a critical condition. She might be dead if it wasn't for young student Christian who, to be fair, risked life and limb wrestling and grappling with the man who was intent on stabbing this woman to death. I mean, Jesus Christ. What sort of fucking drugs do you have to be on? What has to be wrong with you to do something like that? The Sunday Mail, NHS to harvest babies' organs. Now, the Mail on Sunday says women whose unborn babies develop fatal defects in early pregnancy are to be supported to continue to term so the infant's organs can be taken for donation. Critics of this have called the proposal a ghoulish suggestion. Now, I'm not going to offer an opinion. I'm not going to opine because I haven't read the story. I've read so much this morning. I've not read that story, so I'm not going to give an opinion on it. NHS to harvest babies' organs. Critics saying it's ghoulish. It sounds ghoulish, doesn't it? Certainly sounds ghoulish, but it would be wrong of me to say much about it without reading it. The Sunday Independent, its lead story, concerns allegations over a new cover-up of alleged torture of terror suspects by UK security forces. The Sunday Independent claims that US files on the treatment of detainees are being suppressed at the request of the British government. No. We know that for a long time, agencies of the British government, with the full support of the British government, have been rendering detainees to countries and to islands where those detainees were tortured. We know it. We don't need, and fair play to the Independent, by the way. Congratulations to them. James Hanning has the report. If you want to go to independent.co.uk, you will be able to read it. Really good journalism. But we've known that the UK government knew and encouraged secret agencies of the government to torture people abroad and to bring them to countries where the governments of those countries were turning a blind eye to it. We know that. Those are the Sunday papers. This Sunday, March 6th. It is Sunday View. Thanks for listening to this. By the way, I ask you again, I say again and again and again, please share it with others. Let others know there is an alternative to the tidal wave of bullshit on the Murnahan Show, on the Andrew Marr Show, and on flagship Sunday programmes around Europe. There is an alternative. We'll be that alternative. Well, we'll be one aspect of it anyway, on this programme even. Right, let's move on then. I noticed yesterday activists blocked Westminster Bridge. A lot of Socialist Workers' Party people, they were demanding that refugees from Calais be allowed into England. And I noticed, watching the RT and the Channel 4 news reports of the blockade of Westminster Bridge, that a lot of the Socialist Worker Party literature was on show. You know, things saying, let them in. And refugees are welcome and never again. You know, I think this is misguided. I won't dwell on it. Said it too many times. I ask, where is the protest against the destruction of Syria? The actual destruction and laying to waste of countries like Syria, supported by our governments. Where's the protest for that? Now, I did notice the actress Juliet Stevenson, who was in Bended Like Beckham and Mona Lisa's Smile, among other films and television shows and whatnot. Juliet Stevenson was speaking to Channel 4 News, Cassie Newman. She has been to see the Calais jungle, as it's been dubbed. She's not the first actress or actor. Jude Law was there recently, shaking his head and looking devastated by what he was seeing and saying that we need to do more. So this is Juliet Stevenson. I've got to have some water. Juliet Stevenson talking to Cassie Newman. Jesus, Richie. Excuse me. Yes, Juliet Stevenson. It's very early here for me. This is Juliet Stevenson, the actress, Gina, talking to Cassie Newman. Yeah.
Well, as it stands, first of all, the camp is a very, very, it's a pretty terrible place. It's a godforsaken place for them to be living at all. But the main concern, I think, is that after the last week, when, as you know, the French police have been evicting the camp fairly, with tear gas. Determinedly, with tear gas and water cannon and so on, very aggressively, unfortunately. So people are leaving, and the great concern is these children will get lost. They will be picked up by traffickers. As we know, 10,000 children in Europe already have been picked up by traffickers, according to Interpol. So that's a very great risk. And the children at the moment are trying, many of them, to get across to the UK by very dangerous means, by underneath trains or on lorries, or by cutting their way into refrigerated trucks. And a child has already died in that process. So train tracks or traffickers is the current choice for these children.
Oh, won't somebody please think of the children?
Yeah, won't somebody please think of the children? I don't know how much of that is true. Children doing all of what she describes there, cutting their way into trucks and hanging under trains, children on their own. It sounds kind of hysterical to me, right? I'm not saying it isn't happening now, at all. And if this is your first time listening to this programme, be very careful what you assume about my opinion. I'm not hard-hearted and immune to the plight of children having been effectively kicked out of their countries because of the actions of our governments. I'm not immune to that. But that sounds hysterical, what Juliet Stevenson was describing there. You know, children cutting their way into trucks and hanging under trains. What I do suspect, though, is that she did mention trafficking, that those who are pushing the agenda, you know, that countries open their borders up to migrants completely, to all of them, remember, that they will play the children card more and more and more. And going back to the traffickers, I believe that's an intended consequence too, yeah. It sounds like the most bizarre conspiracy theory. But we know that the sick, evil cabal has foot soldiers, namely the managers of public life, who participate in the abuse and the trafficking of children. We know this. My position hasn't changed. It's horrible to see what's happened to the people of Syria and Iraq and Libya and Afghanistan because of the policies of our governments, of our tyrannical governments. But David Icke said something to me a couple of weeks back. And David has always said there are people who need help and they should be helped. But there's also an agenda to get people into Europe who maybe don't need help and people who are capable of doing heinous things while they're in Europe. And he's right on that, is David. I've paraphrased what he said and I've not maybe been as eloquent maybe as I could have been. But David said, Richie, look at how many single young men, unattached men that you see. And when David said this to me, it occurred to me that around about the time David was saying, look at the footage of, you know, the Greek-Macedonian border, look at the footage in, you know, on the Turkish border, look at the footage of what's happening in Calais. David said, look how many young, able-bodied men, seemingly unattached, are there. Since David said that to me, it seems that the television news companies have decided now to focus on women. Now when you see reports of the migrant crisis, you almost exclusively now, in the last few days, at least the last week anyway, you just see women and children. Manipulation? I would suggest yes. And that's my position on it. Not that we shouldn't help these people, but that we know what the agenda really is. So I'm going to leave that, right? Because you're sick of me saying that to you, because you know it. Spanish authorities seized more than 20,000 jihadi military uniforms, bound for Islamic State militants and the Al-Nusra Front, which are an Al-Qaeda affiliate, if you believe it. The uniforms were being smuggled as second-hand clothes so as to ship them undetected. Police confiscated the shipment from Spanish ports but denied that they originated in Spain. Officials said they are investigating where the shipment originally came from. CNN with this very, very brief report.
Spanish authorities say they have confiscated 20,000 military uniforms and supplies intended for an army of jihadi fighters as part of a police operation targeting a business network that supplies terrorists. They're said to work with groups including ISIS and the Al-Qaeda affiliate Al-Nusra Front. Officials say the uniforms were hidden in shipping containers that were declared as carrying second-hand clothes.
Or aid. The Interior Ministry of Spain said the uniforms are being sent to the aforementioned ISIS and Al-Nusra fighters. Other military accessories were also found in the containers. The ports in question were Valencia port and Algeciras. Now, of course, I spent a lot of time only a stone's throw from Algeciras in Spain. The shipments were disguised as humanitarian aid. What made me laugh about that report is investigations are underway to determine where the shipment came from. But that can't be too hard, can it? You know, this is 2016. They fucking know where those containers came from with 20,000 uniforms in them. I would suggest the bill of lading or the order documents were signed and fucking stamped in Virginia, if not in Washington, D.C. It's obvious, people. Who's funding these people? Who's supplying them with equipment? It's a fucking joke is what it is. Ridiculous that people are oblivious to this still. You know, investigating where the shipment came from. Don't get me started. Turkey. The Turks. NATO ally, I would argue one of the most corrupt governments in the world. Its Prime Minister Tayyip Erdogan, remember him? His family has been buying oil from ISIS, stolen from the Syrians. It's Turkey that's been a willing participant in arming ISIS and al-Nusra and everybody else, causing chaos in Syria. Now, you'll probably have heard this already over the last day or so, that the Turkish government broke into the offices of the Zaman newspaper, which is a publication opposed to the Erdogan government. They basically took over a newspaper. The government, the state taking over a newspaper. You know this by now. The very definition of fascism. Now, the paper and those associated with it have condemned it. And they put out a last edition, which was published just before the police raided the offices. Saturday's edition, yesterday's edition, said that Turkey's press had experienced one of the darkest days in its history. As you know, police raided the Istanbul offices of Zaman hours after a court ruling placed it under state control. But the managers were still able to get the last edition out to print. Later on, the police fired tear gas to disperse supporters of the newspaper. They used water cannons as well, as around 500 people gathered in front of the headquarters yesterday. They chanted, "Free press cannot be silenced." Some of the journalists did return to work, but some of them returned to work. And while there, they tweeted that they had lost access to internet. Excuse me, Richie, say it again. Some of them returned to work and tweeted this. Can't read my own typing. Tweeted this, that they had lost access to internal servers and weren't able to file articles, and that they were not able to access their own email accounts. Now, the editor-in-chief of the newspaper, a man called Abdulhamid Bilici, he's also a leading columnist. He was fired. One reporter, Abdullah Bozturk, said attempts were also underway to wipe the entire online archive of the newspaper. Now, Mark Lowen works for the BBC, and he said that the European Union's response to what's happened to this newspaper has been pitiful. What do you expect? The European Union is accused of acting softly on Turkey as it needs the country's support in managing the refugee crisis. The Turkish government would say very little except this, an actual quote from Erdogan himself. He said, "It's legal, not political. For legal reasons, we've taken over the newspaper, not political," he said as his nose grew 16 inches on his face. Now, Gayhan Chichikian, as you probably know, is an RT reporter based in Washington. She had this to say. After Turkish police used tear gas and water cannons to disperse protesters, she wanted to get a quote from the US State Department. This is Gayhan Chichikian.
Andrew, the U.S. State Department disapproves of what Turkey does to its media. You know, usually when journalists, myself included, ask about Turkey, the State Department is very careful not to offend its ally too much, even in cases where Turkey's policies completely contradict U.S. stated policies. Washington can often be seen walking on eggshells, sort of, when it comes to Turkey. But this time, the tone seemed different. Take a listen. Can you condemn the Turkish court decision to replace the entire management and editorial board of Feze Media Group? One of its main publications, Zaman Daily, has been sharply critical of the Erdogan government, and they are now accused of helping terrorists. Can you condemn that decision?
We see this as the latest in a series of troubling judicial and law enforcement actions taken by the Turkish government, targeting media outlets and others critical of it. We call on the Turkish government to ensure full respect for due process and equal treatment under the law, court-ordered supervision of a media company's finances and operations should not prompt changes to the newsroom or editorial policy. See,
the problem is US folks are among the most poorly informed people on planet Earth. It's a long-standing cliche and assumption that people in the United States are a bit fucking thick. They're not. They are no less or no more intelligent than people from any other part of the world. They are just poorly informed. Some of it is their own fault, because while the cable news channels will not cover the story about the Zaman newspaper being basically invaded by the Turkish government, you know, Fox News, CNN, ABC, C-SPAN, CBS Evening News won't cover that story. No fucking way will they cover it. Right? And that's to the detriment of the American people. But The broadsheets will, or some of them will. I know the Boston Globe ran the story. I know the New York Times ran the story, and there was a small segment in the USA Today. But very few people read broadsheet newspapers anymore. That's about the size of it, you know. Some of those newspapers are asking the same questions as Guyan Chichikan. Why are we in bed with these lunatics? And when I say these lunatics, we're not talking about the Turkish people. We're talking about the sinister scumbag mafia Turkish government. So some of the broadsheets will ask these questions, but you won't get the questions on cable news. And unfortunately, the world we live in today, most people in the United States get their news, in inverted commas, from some of these bloody stations. Right, very quick pause. When I come back, loads more to tell you. This is Sunday View in association with davidicke.com/headlines.
You're listening to The Richie Allen Show in association with davidicke.com.
Have you lost access to important data from a computer hard drive, mobile phone, or other storage device? Maybe you have a broken hard drive containing years of information, or a smartphone that no longer works from which you'd like the pictures, movies, and chats recovered. If you would like to recover data from any type of digital device, including desktop and laptop computers, external hard drives, cameras, smartphones, NAS, and RAID servers, then contact Data Clinic today at dataclinic.co.uk now.
Do you want to release the full potential of your soul consciousness and find out how to experience that power in all areas of your life now? Go to livingasyoursoul.com for free guidance with in-depth how-to articles, free healing meditations of creation recordings, free soul solutions, and much, much more. livingasyoursoul.com, making the profound practical.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with davidicke.com.
Welcome back. Do share this on social media. Share it on Facebook, share it on Twitter. Let others know that it's there. It'll be on YouTube today as well. So watch it on YouTube. Thanks for doing that. The programme needs your constant support, people. It really does. And I thank you for it. So go to redistribution.co.uk. There are PayPal details there and bank transfer details. Please set up a regular recurring subscription of whatever you can afford. If you can't afford to do that, help out by sharing it on social media. Do that much for me. I really would appreciate that. We live in a fascist state too. I mentioned at the top of this programme when talking about the Sunday newspaper stories today, I mentioned that on Thursday last, John Longworth, who on Thursday last was the leader of the British Chambers of Commerce, which is an important and respected position, well, Longworth said he backed Britain leaving the European Union. Fair enough, right? He's entitled to his opinion, right? No. On Friday, he was suspended for breaching the BCC's commitment to remaining neutral in the debate. Before he was suspended, he spoke very briefly with Sky News. This is brief. Have a listen.
The next financial year, but instead they think what's best for their children and grandchildren when making this decision. And I actually went on in my speech beyond what the Chambers of Commerce believe to talk a little bit about what my analysis of the evidence has been. And my analysis of the evidence is that actually with the reforms that we've received so far, the UK would be better off taking a decision to leave the European Union.
Oh, we'd be much better off leaving the European Union. We know it, you know it, I know it, he knows it, she knows it, we all know it. Imagine that. A man expresses an opinion. I think that we should leave the European Union because we'd be much better off, and he is suspended. Now, Boris Johnson, the Mayor of London, and some say, that's a very Fox News term, some people say, some people might say, some say the next Prime Minister of the United Kingdom. Such is the complete lack of democracy in this country. The man's already been preordained. I would say yes, it's more than likely he will be Prime Minister. That's not a good thing. But Johnson said that Longworth was crushed by the agents of Project Fear in a statement given by Johnson last night. He said it was absolutely scandalous that John Longworth even had been forced to step aside. This is a man, said Johnson, who reached the conclusion after long reflection and a lifetime's experience of business that it would be better to vote leave. He speaks for the many small and medium-sized businesses, the lifeblood of the economy, who cannot understand why they should comply with more and more regulation over which this country has no democratic control. Johnson added it was not right that when someone has the guts to dissent from the establishment line, he or she is immediately crushed by the agents of Project Fear. The government is denying petitioning the British Chambers of Commerce to move against Longworth, but they are lying, which is their default position. And when the government can have you removed from your job because of an opinion you hold, you, dear friend, are living in a fascist state. And we are, by the way. And I want to play you a clip. You know, speaking as I've done so much recently about whether or not whether it would make financial or economic sense for Britain to leave the European Union, or whether it would be better for them to stay in. You know my opinion. I've said on recent programmes that the mainstream media cannot find an economist that will lie and say that Britain will suffer if it leaves the European Union, because all evidence points to the fact that they're better off trading from outside the bloc. On that, something I wanted to bring you, and I'll just bring it up now, I'll bring it up now in a second. Yes, so former Conservative Party Chancellor, Norman Lamont, he was speaking to the Telegraph newspaper, and he was speaking directly to the question of whether Britain would be better off trading outside the bloc. Have a listen to Norman Lamont. I hope this is okay. I couldn't download this.
People talk about the EU as though it has some enormous tariff wall around it, which is absolutely not the case. The average tariff is about 3%. So many countries that are not in the EU trade very successfully with it. Switzerland is not a member of the EU. It exports more per capita to the EU than we do. It's more integrated into the EU than we do. Perhaps more tellingly, though, is the United States. The United States actually sells more to the EU than Britain does, both in goods and services. So this idea that you can't sell into something without being a member of it is completely false. Everybody has access to the EU, and it doesn't have a large tariff barrier around it. In my opinion, the best option would be to have a specially negotiated free trade agreement. You must remember that the EU needs that just as much as Britain does. People say, oh, on what terms would we sell to them? They need to know on what terms they would sell to us. Britain is the biggest purchaser of German cars, the biggest market for German manufactured goods. They need to come to an agreement with us. And it's no surprise that Mr. Schäuble, the finance minister of Germany, has said that in the event of Britain leaving the EU, a free trade agreement would not just be possible, it would be necessary. And even Jacques Delors, the former president of the Commission, has said that he recognises that Britain in many ways is only interested in an economic arrangement with the EU. And if that is what Britain decides, that should be arranged.
And they should leave. He's absolutely right, Norman Lamont, you see. And kudos to the Telegraph for putting that out there. It's just a pack of lies, isn't it? It's one lie after another. And if you dare try and expose the lie, we will do to you what we've done to John Longworth. Namely, we will try and destroy your career. Unbelievable. Great to see so many publications over the last couple of days, by the way, RT.com and the Huffington Post, to name just a couple, mentioning David Icke's response to the naming of him by David Cameron in France last week, when Cameron was joking and mocking conspiracy theorists like David Icke. Good to see one or two of the online publications that are well read having the decency to mention what David had really been saying. I mean, the Huffington Post did go on with that lizard nonsense that they carry on with. But in fairness, they did then post a number of tweets by David, which give a good flavour of what David Icke has always said about the European Union. So good to see that. Good to see that, indeed. This is Sunday View. US Republican presidential frontrunner Donald Trump, I'm reading now from BBC Online. Trump has called for a one-on-one battle with Ted Cruz, urging other rivals to quit the nomination race. Cruz also suggested it was time for other hopefuls to step aside, people like Rubio and John Kasich. Trump and Cruz won 2 states yesterday, 2 states each yesterday. As you probably know by now. In the Democratic race, Bernie Sanders took 2 states, but Hillary Clinton remained, or maintained even, her front-runner status after she won a big victory in Louisiana. Speaking after wins in the Republican Kentucky caucuses and Louisiana primary election, Trump told a news conference that he would love to take on Ted Cruz one-on-one. Love to take him on one-on-one. Got some audio for you. This is courtesy of the BBC.
I want to congratulate Ted on Maine and on Kansas, and he should do well in Maine because it's very close to Canada, let's face it. I mean, a lot of truth. I think Marco Rubio had a very, very bad night, and personally I'd call for him to drop out of the race. I think it's time now that he drop out of the race. I really think so. I think it's probably time. You know, I don't think tonight he can get up and rant and rave and, oh, he did great. He comes in third. He comes in fourth. Every time he comes in third or fourth, he says, you got to be able to win. And he has not been able to win, and I think it's time that he drops out. I would love to take on Ted one-on-one. That would be so much fun because Ted can't win New York. He can't win New Jersey. He can't win Pennsylvania. He can't win California.
Yeah, so that's from the BBC then after yesterday's round of primaries. What I suppose we should hear just a little bit from Cruz, shouldn't we, as a matter of balance? Here's a bit of Cruz.
We're seeing Republicans coalesce around our campaign because ours is the only campaign that has repeatedly beaten Donald Trump, and indeed we're the only campaign that can and will beat Donald Trump in this race. To date, we've beaten Donald Trump not once, not twice, but 7 times in states all across this country with wide geographic diversity, wide ideological diversity. But if you don't want to see Donald Trump as the nominee, then I invite you to join our team, as so many supporters of Marco and John did in Kansas, as so many supporters of Marco and John did.
Yeah, there's no point in hearing any more of that. I won't again labour the point. Stalking horse was the term our friend Patrick Heddingson used to describe Donald Trump. Trojan horse is another term you could use. I've believed from day one that Trump's place in the race was always to throw the election to Hillary Clinton. Nothing has changed that. And what has occurred to me listening to Trump and watching him and the impact he's had on the debates and how the debates were full of who can say the most obnoxious, who can levy the most obnoxious claims against your opponents, who can be more hostile, who can get the most ridiculous soundbite out. I began to think that the advent of reality television over the last 10, 15 years, programs where men and women are pitted against one another on so-called reality TV in competitions to earn jobs, like in The Apprentice, for example, which was born in New York, and he was the very first, a presenter of that program. But Big Brother and other programs, those programs were kind of paving the way for this sort of politics. Those programs were getting people used to this sort of Punch and Judy show, vacuous nonsense. No real issues are being discussed. No real solutions are being discussed. That people are tuning in just to see guys screaming abuse at one another. It's a reality television show is what I'm saying, basically. The US presidential race. And I believe that people are accepting that because they've been preconditioned to accept it with the advent of reality television over the last 10 to 15 years. I think to me, it's quite obvious. It really is obvious. It's horrendous to see that. And to see people accept it. Trump's an idiot. Every single candidate, to me, every single candidate in that race is an absolutely monumental idiot. I could probably find agreement on certain issues with Bernie Sanders, who's probably a nice guy, again, like Jeremy Corbyn, probably decent, but doesn't have a clue about the bigger picture. Terrible. And last night, after all of that from Trump, he was at a rally in Florida. And at the rally in Florida, Trump torture came up again. A lot of criticism for Trump about torture. Have a listen to Trump on torture.
And as far as the waterboarding is concerned, we have to stay within the laws. We have to stay within the laws. Hey, who here thinks that ISIS, who chops off heads, who drowns people in a cage, who here thinks that ISIS stays within the laws, right? We're going to have those laws broadened because we're playing with two sets of rules. Their rules and our rules.
And now you're hearing a load of screaming, right? This is in Florida yesterday. And you know why they're screaming? This is typical of a Trump rally. Protesters are being thrown out by massive security guards. And as they're being thrown out, the idiots in the audience, thousands, are screaming out, 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 out. Trump is standing there laughing as protesters are being brutally thrown out, punched in many cases, and dragged out by big fuck-off, brain-dead, no-necked, muscle-bound idiots. And that's been a staple of the Trump campaign. You know, there are a lot of learned men and women in the United States, people who really understand what's going on, who get the big picture. I feel so sorry for them having to endure this. It's not any better here now. I'm not saying it's any better here. But there it's so obvious. It's more obvious there what this system, what this cabal, what this agenda is. More obvious than here. You would think it's easier to highlight it, to show it to people in America, looking at that. Tragedy. Absolute tragedy it is. It's terrible to watch. Terrible to be looking at it. And I'm going to leave you today with something which I came across today. It's in a lot of newspapers today. And, well, all I can say is, if you haven't read Phantom Self by David Icke, I recommend you get a copy of it. I really do. This is in the newspapers right across the broadsheets and tabloids today, the websites, BBC. People over 40 in England are to be given more information about dementia to help improve early diagnosis of the condition, according to Jeremy Hunt. He's the Health Secretary. During their free NHS health check, patients will be told when they should report memory problems to their GP. Hunt said the government's aim was for the UK to be the world's most dementia-friendly by 2020. This all comes after Alzheimer's Research UK, which is a charity, Alzheimer's Research UK, warned that the condition posed a looming national health crisis. The Alzheimer's Research UK charity warned the condition posed a looming national health crisis. Under the plans, there is a new aim for 10% of all people diagnosed with dementia to take part in research to try and improve diagnosis and treatment of the condition. The Care Quality Commission, which will also include standards of dementia care in their inspections, while current information on which regions are good at diagnosing the condition will be strengthened with Ofsted-style ratings. Hunt went on to say 7-day services in the NHS will improve conditions for dementia patients in hospitals in England. It is a looming national health crisis. Why are more and more people, younger people, being diagnosed with dementia and with Alzheimer's? Do you know why? I guess you know why. You wouldn't be listening to this programme otherwise. I'm not going to say anything. I was going to spend the next few minutes talking about geoengineering, spraying barium, strontium, aluminium particles in the soil, in the water, which any number of, decent investigators, scientific men and women have been raising the alarm about for a number of years now. The massive levels of aluminium in the atmosphere, barium, strontium, all of these things which are absolutely linked to dementia. Not only in people, but in bees. I don't have to tell you what's going to happen if we kill off the bee population on planet Earth. We are being engineered to develop massive levels of dementia around the world. And to have charities coming out saying that it's a looming national health crisis. And nobody in the mainstream media is asking why. What could possibly be the environmental factors that are leading to such an increase in the diagnoses of Alzheimer's and of dementia? Why are they asking those questions? Are they asking those questions in mainstream media? No, they're not. They are trotting out the tired party line. We're getting better at detecting it. And as we are getting better at detecting it, we are coming across more cases of it. Bullshit. More and more and more people are getting dementia and Alzheimer's because that is the plan. I'm going to leave you with that. That was Sunday View for Sunday, March 6th, 2016. I've been Richie Allen. Check out davidicke.com/headlines. Join me tomorrow, Monday at 8 p.m. GMT for the first live Richie Allen show of the week. It's been great having your company today. Do go to richieallen.co.uk and please support the Richie Allen shows, the television, well, not the television show, because we do that for free in Manchester, but support the radio shows and Sunday View by donating via PayPal or bank transfer. Thanks for being with me. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday. I've really enjoyed chatting with you. I always do.
Broadcasting the information the mainstream media won't touch. This is The Richie Allen Show in association with DavidIcke.com.